and he has just been the president at Bainbridge Graduate Institute in Bainbridge Island, Washington. And so, I mean, he has a very lengthy bio. I will not go into this, but just to say that he's had 40 years of experience doing systems and communication sciences. He's been a faculty member, he's been a president of the university, and now he's an interim dean. And so with no further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to Dr. Strauss.
Well, thank you, Tim, and thank all of you for the acknowledgement. We're operating under some strained conditions here. I can barely read the slides. I suspect most of you can't, but we are where we are, and we'll do with it as we will. I'm presenting this as the co-chairman of the Task Force on Sustainable Energy. My other co-chair was Dan Arvizu, the director of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and we do this on behalf of our task force and, of course, the full National Science Board. Normally, as I would do a talk like this about our work, I would spend a good bit of time motivating the reasons that we're interested in sustainable energy, talking about energy independence, talking about climate change, any number of factors. But in fact, this morning, our two keynote speakers did a really fine job of laying the groundwork, and you're all engaged anyway, so we'll go directly to the work of the task force, and if there are any issues with motivation, I presume you'll not be shy about commenting. Now, Tim mentioned that I'm the interim dean of engineering at Texas Tech University. I've got about 5 days into the job, so I guess I must be an expert. I've just been exposed to West Texas and all its charms, and it's been an interesting revelation. As I start, I'd like to give a little commercial message, because I was delighted upon being appointed interim dean to find that we have two brand new $7+ million endowed chairs, one in solar energy, one in sustainable energy. This is an enormous challenge and an enormous opportunity, and here I've got a group of folks that know all about those fields and perhaps would be helpful in nominating to us people that would be real leaders in those areas, with a particular focus on building a team and building sponsorship for work in that area. So if you think of someone appropriate, I hope you'll call it to my attention, and if nothing else happens in this talk, that would be an enormous benefit to me and hopefully to the broader community. With that much said, I'll talk to our recommendations and try and say a little bit about strategy, a little bit about coordination, and try and comment perhaps on the systems aspects of our work. Let me say a little bit about the National Science Board. We're authorized to establish the policies of the National Science Foundation. We're in effect their governing board, and we serve as an advisor to both the President and Congress on national policy issues related to science, engineering, research, and education. Now, the fact that we are authorized to provide advice doesn't mean that anybody listens, but we're very hopeful about that going forward. And that's probably enough said on that issue. The board's composed of 25 members, are appointed by the President, confirmed by the Senate, and one of our members, not surprisingly, is the director of the National Science Foundation. Members serve 6-year terms. We're on a rotating basis. We're drawn from industry, nonprofit organizations, and universities, a broad, diverse group with an enormous commitment to science and engineering, and particularly education. We've done, in line with our second charge to provide advice, we've produced some reports in recent years. Some of you may have seen them, most recently being a report on international science and engineering that a task force that I chaired came out about a year ago. Like everybody in the world, we've produced a recent report on STEM education, a report on transformative research, another report on hurricane research. About every year and a half, this comes out. And interestingly, this part of our charge is truly amazing, that we've got this ability to identify and comment on issues of significant importance. It's a part of our charge that I think really makes our work and our participation worthwhile. Now, the Task Force on Sustainable Energy is about 2 years old. We came out of a prior significant study on the part of the whole board looking at the influence of of energy on the environment, climate, health, economics, national security. We consulted with experts literally around the country, some folks you'd know, Chris Somerville at Stanford, Nate Lewis at Caltech, talked to Ray Arbach, the Deputy Director of DOE for Science. I guess it's Undersecretary for Science. Let me get that title correctly. Gathered a good deal of information which justified in our minds and to the board the importance of doing work on sustainable energy. The task force charge is here. There's no point in my reading it to you in detail except to say that we're going to be providing recommendations to the President and Congress and particularly specific guidance to NSF on its role in this effort. And here, in fact, we've got some clout. We can hope to affect those recommendations. A little bit about our activities. Started in 2007 with the formation of the task force. Started off with 3 roundtable discussions sprinkled around the country, trying to gather data and information that could support our work. Initially in Washington, D.C., meeting with representatives of the federal agencies, and a smattering of folks from the local universities, people engaged in energy policy issues. Then moved out to Golden, Colorado, where we spoke with an audience from throughout the center of our country with particular focus, it won't surprise you, on NREL. And then rounded up our roundtable discussions in Berkeley, where we met with a broad group of representatives from the largely California universities. And interestingly, Dan Kamen, who's here today, was one of our discussants, and Steve Chu joined us and gave a few words. So we've heard, I believe we've heard from the right people. In December, we prepared a draft report that was released for public comment in April. I don't remember exactly, but I would hope that some of you were contacted in that regard, and I hope the report has profited from your input. We've now gotten board approval for the report, subject to final edits, and we expect to release the report in August. The report was on our website. Tammy, is it still? Yeah. So the draft report is on the website, and you have at your places an executive summary of the report should you want further information. Starting off, I guess it's important to know what we mean by sustainable energy. We start off with the notion of sustainability. It's the ability to meet present needs without compromising future. And then our interest in sustainable energy includes the technologies themselves. In that first bullet, we're particularly concerned with the greenhouse gas emissions. And in our definition of sustainable energy, we're concerned about reducing our dependence on imported energy, largely oil. And we're concerned with affordability and availability in sufficient quantities to make a difference, particularly with respect to climate change. If we talk about a vision for a sustainable energy future, we're concerned with 3 major priorities. Certainly starting with national and economic security by increasing our country's energy independence. We want to focus on environmental stewardship, reduce energy and carbon intensity, and of course to generate continued economic growth through innovation in energy technologies. And we'd be remiss if we didn't, at least with this administration, mention green jobs. A set of key findings. The need for leadership, particularly emphasizing the comprehensive coordinated federal strategy for sustainable energy initiatives, R&D investment, there's no question in our minds, and I suspect in yours, of the need for far greater private and federal support for sustainable energy research and development. In fact, I guess I'm treading on dangerous ground to comment on policy with this group, but certainly as we look at this issue, we don't believe these issues that we're talking about with respect to climate change can be solved through policy alone. We do believe significant improvements have to come through innovation in technology, and we're stressing that broadly, of course, and most particularly with respect to the National Science Foundation. We've got approximately a $6.5 billion annual budget for work in basic science. An embarrassingly small percentage of that is spent on sustainable energy, something we hope to influence, and I hope to the extent that you speak out on this, that you will as well. Obviously, policy development is important, and the fact that our current energy economy and current energy policies do not price the impact of carbon emissions on the environment is clearly at the source of some of the difficulties, and we're certainly stressing the importance of that. Education and workforce is important, both to the country and in the impact that the National Science Foundation can have. And as we heard from our speaker this morning, this whole issue of global cooperation is of vital importance. The fact that we have not taken a leadership position nationally is more than just embarrassing, both for what we could learn from our partners around the world and the importance we have of providing leadership, particularly in the developing nations. And then finally, this whole issue of consumer involvement, awareness, and action. There just needs to be more done. I think Nick spoke very eloquently to that in some of his remarks, particularly in answers to questions. I don't know that we need to belabor it, but it's certainly very much on our minds. If I move to our recommendations, we've got an overarching priority recommendation regarding the U.S. government's need to develop and clearly define and lead a nationally coordinated research, development, demonstration, deployment, and education, which is a real mouthful, strategy to transform the U.S. energy system to a sustainable energy economy that's far less carbon intensive, and I don't think I'll get much argumentation from this group in that regard. We have 6 recommendations broken down around our 6 findings, first being the need to coordinate this strategy in sustainable energy, starting with a specific recommendation for the establishment of a Presidential Sustainable Energy Council to coordinate all federal activities, the importance of the government providing a leading example by adopting sustainable energy measures throughout the U.S. government, and I think we're seeing significant progress in that regard, and then the importance to organize and coordinate energy activities across the country, with particular emphasis on technological innovation. Speaking to your system-level concerns, where as part of this recommendation, we're focusing on the importance of systems-level analyses of energy systems to, and you can read the slide, well, some of you can read the slide as well as I, but mentioning the importance of transparent and well-informed policy decisions, the understanding the relative benefits of multiple technologies, to understand energy consumer behavior particularly, and then most importantly to incorporate life cycle and cost benefit analyses into planning and evaluation. Our recommendation 2, relating to our finding 2, is the importance of the U.S. government boosting research and development investment, the need to increase federal investment in sustainable energy to meet the challenges, and the importance of facilitating innovation by encouraging investment from others in research and commercialization of sustainable energy technologies. Our third recommendation, U.S. government should consider stable policies and stability here, and that you would know far better than I, is the really important word. We've just had too many reversals to build a stable, sustainable energy economy when the policies that support it keep changing. And I think we're all encouraged by what we see in this new administration, and let's see what happens. Obviously, we're concerned with facilitating discovery and concerned, too, with policies that would accelerate the adoption and commercialization of sustainable energy technologies. Moving to education and workforce development, I've got a direct personal interest, and I'm sure you all do as well, at the importance of bolstering science and technology education in general, let alone related to sustainable energy, and then the importance of bolstering workforce training in sustainable energy fields. Again, on the issue of the U.S. government's role in global cooperation, certainly in sustainable energy strategies, and also to reducing barriers to cross-national collaboration in the research. And finally, on recommendation 6, the issue of the U.S. government promoting public awareness and action with importance of creating and supporting a multi-pronged energy efficiency and conservation strategy for consumers, and then to provide the accurate and easily accessible information on life cycle impacts so consumers can make informed choices. It's amazing that we haven't done a better job with that, and hopefully we will. On the issue where we're actually going to do it, as the governing board for the National Science Foundation, is to continue to increase emphasis on innovation and sustainable energy technologies and education, and see if we, as that issue of top priority, if we can't move up the investment that we're making in those areas. In terms of our specific guidance to NSF, we want to coordinate and enhance sustainable energy activities through this use of this recommended interagency working group. And we want to strengthen systems approaches. We want the NSF to strengthen systems approaches in research programs, certainly in interdisciplinary systems and with an emphasis on environmental accounting, and to fund innovative science and engineering research on reducing energy and carbon intensity. Further guidances to NSF will be to strengthen science and engineering partnerships among the states and universities and the private sector. I now have a direct personal stake in that, I find. We want to support education and workforce development, collaborate internationally, and promote public awareness and action. All of these fall directly under the umbrella of NSF. They make sense with NSF's charge, and we're going to see that something more happens in that regard with respect to sustainable energy. In conclusion, we ask what is needed to achieve a stable and sustainable energy future. We would start off with an immediate and positive transformation of the U.S. energy system to a sustainable energy economy. Easy for us to say. Hopefully through your work here in developing the policy statements that come out of tomorrow's roundtable work, you will make a major impact in facilitating that. And then, hopefully, he said, and you say. And then just repeating the elements of the strategy to provide federal leadership and coordination, to boost public and private investment, construct essential policies, build human capital, engage in international cooperation, and this issue of promoting public awareness and action. Copies of the report are, well, we've just heard, are available now through the NSB website. But the final report will be available both electronically and in published form in August. And there's a place here on that last internet address gives you a place where you can actually order copies of the report. I would encourage you to do so, and the task force and the Science Board will be most interested in hearing your reactions. I thank you for your attention. I'll be pleased, with some minutes left, to respond to any questions or issues you might have.
have any questions for Dr. Strauss? Well, if not, actually, I would like to, I guess I'll
We
take
have
the,
one hand up.
Chris, I'll take the first, and I'll pass it to you. Your recommendation is, you know, policy development that the energy economy is carbon intensive and does not adequately value the environment as a public good. You know, I agree with it being carbon intensive, but I will argue with you somewhat on the value of the environment as a public good, because we've had 40 years of the Clean Air Act in which utilities had been required to put on, you know, scrubbers and SCRs to clean up coal plants. So the Clean Air Act establishes that there is the environment as part of public good, and health is also an issue with the Clean Air Act. So I think you may need to think about how that's worded a little bit, because they do value the environment as a public good. And I think that's a good example from which we can build upon to regulating carbon, is that the environment is a public good. So
But the point is, we haven't regulated carbon. We focused on particulate and other obvious health effects, but not on carbon and the impact on carbon in terms of our existence on this planet, let alone our health, is going to be as, if not more important than all of the things you mentioned.
That's why I would recommend you change it. It said that it does not actually value the impact of carbon on the environment as a public good. Instead of the generic, broader statement that it does not value the environment.
That's a terrific suggestion, and if we're not in print, we'll adopt it. Consider it done.
Thank you. Chris.
Thank you, John. Chris Hill, George Mason. Your priority recommendations and guidance for the foundation are interesting as presented here, and I've only seen this document. They are all of a process nature, international cooperation, more collaboration, all the things that all of us in research and development policy believe in thoroughly and always. I wondered if in your inquiry, though, you had an opportunity to explore a little bit deeper into the substance of the matter, that is to say, identifying an array of technical challenges to be addressed that National Science Foundation programs as they now exist or might exist could address to help resolve technical uncertainties and barriers to sustainable energy systems. In other words, did you go down one level into the technical weeds of the subject?
We tried, well, in fact, we did, but they didn't make the cut, in part because the National Science Foundation makes it a policy to respond to its audience. All right? We do not set science policy for the United States. We tend to respond to the demand we see from the scientists themselves. And that's sort of rather deeply ingrained in our whole philosophy. It's also the case that on some of the areas that we had specific issues and would have liked to have made recommendations, we found we were treading on toes, particularly with respect to carbon pricing, and that probably doesn't surprise you.
We have another question in the corner back
Question,
there.
check.
Ken Zweibel, George Washington University. I have a particular concern, especially for recommendations to the NSF, having to do with the texture of research in the sense of breakthroughs, futuristic blue sky work, and practical work and supportive work for the progress to decarbonization. And that comes out when I hear you say that we need some kind of a breakthrough, or we need something different from what we have. But to be honest with you, although I had shared that at some earlier time in my career, if we do more nuclear, we can do it with some issue with nuclear proliferation, et cetera. If we do more solar and wind, we can do it with some issue of cost. We don't necessarily need a single breakthrough. It's really a question of cost. So I wonder if there's another way of saying that for the science community, so that they have the spectrum of choices for research to do. That isn't just futuristic, but also supportive, foundational for what exists that helps move it along, and would mandate that for the NSF, because I believe right now the NSF is somewhat lost in the wilderness on, for instance, my specialty, solar energy.
Yeah, it's interesting that you should mention that, because perhaps the most severe criticism that NSF is subjected to relates to its lack of emphasis on transformative research. In fact, that's what in part prompted that one study that was on the slide there. There has been a lot of public criticism about we're just responding totally to the community which is established by senior scientists engaged in supporting the work they've been doing for the last 30 years. So we've been, I think we're becoming increasingly sensitive that I think there's probably a pretty good balance. I don't see further refinement of established technologies such as what you mentioned in solar and wind and the like. I don't see that suffering from lack of emphasis from NSF.
So I recently sat on an NSF review panel for proposals, and almost every one of them was talking about 1% solar cells made with exotic materials. It wasn't just because people were doing things that didn't matter and wouldn't work. It was because they don't know how to do things that matter and do work. So there may be things out there in other fields than solar energy, which I'm less familiar with, that are more like what you're saying. But my experience is that in solar energy, and this is true for basic energy science and Office of Energy Research, they don't do relevant work. They're not supporting an agenda for transforming us to a low-carbon economy.
Well, it's a good concern. Our fundamental commitment is, of course, to basic science, and basic science does tend to be in the more exotic areas at times. But
can you guys have this conversation?
yes,
But
right.
basic science can also be foundational on stuff that we do now.
We should continue this conversation, and we should engage others at the NSF in the process.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So the concept of having coordinated activities across the agencies and across the parts of the government is certainly pretty critical. When you give advice to NSF now as it goes forward to emphasize energy, did you give any guidance on how their activities should distinguish themselves from what's happening in the Department of Energy on the basic science side?
We have not, no. As near as I can tell from what I've seen, the overlap has not been problematic.
Well, it could be it's not been problematic because NSF has stayed away from energy research for a while.
We do not have the investment in it we should. But I think your caution's a good one, something to keep in mind.
Any other questions?
Question over.
Wait for the mic, please.
I have a question about the first recommendation where we talk about the U.S. government should do X. The U.S. government is made up of many different entities. I wonder why you didn't get more specific and say, Congress should do this, executive branch do this, DOE do this. Sometimes we get the feeling that, well, somebody else is going to do it. Would it be better to push down on that and say, okay, I think these agencies should do this way?
We expect to follow up on that in our follow-up work and working with Congress. We've had some experience in the past with being more specific and find it's probably better to engage ourselves. That this isn't the end of our work, it's sort of the beginning. We're now moving into a public phase where we'll be working with the Congress and with other agencies. And at that time, we're going to be trying to get them to develop specifics to back that up. And then they're engaged and they have ownership. And they're not saying, why did you say that and not that?
That will be our last question. We have about 10 minutes before the panel session starts this afternoon at 1 o'clock. Please let's give our speaker a round of applause.